Most people know Ferdinand Magellan as the guy who sailed around the world. Except he didn't. He never made it back to Europe. In fact, he died on a beach in the Philippines. By the time his expedition got there, the crew had already been through something that sounds almost impossible. They had crossed an ocean so large, they literally started eating leather. Not because they wanted to, because there was nothing else left. And this is the story of the worst voyage in human history. It's 1519. Europe is obsessed with spices. Not because they make food taste better, because spices are insanely valuable. We're talking about products worth fortunes. The problem is that getting them means controlling trade routes, and those routes are dominated by other powers. So Magellan comes up with an idea. Instead of going east to Asia, what if they go west? Sounds simple. Today we know that's possible. Back then, nobody really knew what would happen, because nobody had ever done it. The expedition leaves Spain with 5 ships. And at first, the biggest threat isn't the ocean, it's the men themselves. As the fleet pushes farther south, confidence in Magellan begins to crack. Then, things get worse. The Santiago, one of the expedition's 5 ships, is wrecked during a scouting mission along the Patagonian coast. No lives are lost. But the disaster only deepens the growing sense that the voyage is heading toward ruin. Captains like Juan de Cartagena, Gaspar de Quesada, and Luis de Mendoza openly challenge Magellan's authority. Eventually, they decide they've had enough. 3 ships join a mutiny: San Antonio, Concepcion, and Victoria. Their goal? Remove Magellan from command and turn back to Spain. For a moment, it looks like the entire expedition might collapse. But Magellan moves fast. Mendoza is killed. Quesada is executed. Cartagena is abandoned on the Patagonian coast. The mutiny is crushed. And from that point on, everyone knows who's in charge. Eventually, they find a passage through South America. Today we call it the Strait of Magellan. After months of searching, it finally looks like Magellan was right. There really is a way through. But even then, the expedition isn't out of danger. As the fleet navigates the narrow channels of the strait, one ship suddenly disappears. The San Antonio, its pilot, Estevão Gomes, has decided he's had enough. He arrests Captain Alvaro de Mesquita, a loyal supporter of Magellan, takes control of the ship, and turns back toward Spain. Just like that, the expedition loses its largest ship, another sign that not everyone believes this voyage will succeed. But the remaining ships press on, and eventually, they emerge into a vast ocean unlike anything they had ever imagined. Magellan calls it the Pacific. The name means peaceful, and at first it seems fitting. The waters are calm, the winds are favorable. But what Magellan and his crew don't realize is that they're about to cross the largest ocean on Earth, and they have absolutely no idea how big it is. And I mean no idea. Imagine thinking you're about to take a road trip across a state and discovering you're actually crossing an entire continent. That's basically what happened. The problem was, the expedition hadn't packed for an ocean that large. Every extra day at sea meant fewer supplies. Every extra week meant less food. And as the Pacific stretched on and on, the crew began eating through their reserves. At first, the food situation is manageable. The ships are carrying hardtack, which is basically a biscuit. And when I say biscuit, don't picture something fresh from a bakery. Think edible brick. The biscuit was designed to survive long sea voyages. The problem is that the voyage became much longer than expected, so eventually the hardtack starts going bad. Then, really bad. According to accounts of Antonio Pigafetta, the biscuits became full of worms, and the sailors still ate them, because the alternative was starvation. Then things get desperate. The food runs out, completely. And this is the point where the story starts sounding less like exploration, and more like survival horror. The crew begins eating leather, straps, equipment coverings, anything made from animal hide. They'd boil it for hours, soften it enough to chew, and then eat it. Imagine being so hungry that a piece of leather suddenly looks like dinner. That's where they were. And if that wasn't bad enough, scurvy shows up. Now today, we know scurvy is caused by vitamin C deficiency. But before, nobody knew why it happened. People just watched their bodies fall apart. Their gums swelled, their teeth loosened, their strength disappeared. Men who had survived storms and mutiny suddenly couldn't even stand, and one by one, they started dying. Eventually, land. Finally, after months of suffering, the expedition reaches the islands that would one day become known as the Philippines. At the time, they were a collection of independent kingdoms and communities. The name Philippines didn't even exist yet. It would be given decades later in honor of King Philip II of Spain. And for the crew, this must have felt like a miracle. Fresh food, fresh water, actual civilization. The nightmare was finally over. Except it wasn't, because this is where Magellan makes the decision that will ultimately get him killed. He starts building relationships with local rulers. One of the most important is Raja Humabon of Cebu. The two men quickly form an alliance. Gifts are exchanged, trade is discussed, and before long, many of Humabon's followers are baptized into Christianity. From Magellan's perspective, everything seems to be going perfectly. He has crossed the Pacific, he has found friendly allies, and he is beginning to establish Spanish influence in the region. But then, a problem emerges. Not every leader is willing to recognize Humabon's authority, and not every leader is interested in submitting to Spain. One of them is a chief named Lapu-Lapu, the leader of Mactan. When Humabon calls on neighboring leaders to acknowledge his alliance with the Spanish, Lapu-Lapu refuses. He refuses to pay tribute, he refuses to submit, and he refuses to recognize foreign authority. Now, this dispute doesn't really have anything to do with Magellan. He could have stayed out of it. He could have continued the voyage. He could have left the local leaders to settle their own disagreements. But Magellan sees an opportunity. If he helps Humabon defeat Lapu-Lapu, he can strengthen the alliance. He can demonstrate Spanish military power and maybe convince other leaders to follow. So he decides to intervene. From Magellan's perspective, this probably looks manageable. Instead, he walks straight into a disaster. April 27, 1521, Ferdinand Magellan landed on Mactan with armed Spanish forces. At low tide, they waded through shallow waters toward the shore, weapons raised as they advanced inland. At the shore, Lapu-Lapu's warriors stood ready, waiting in formation. Arrows and spears struck as Magellan's men advanced from the shoreline, struggling through shallow water and uneven ground. Lapu-Lapu's warriors surrounded them, striking fast and forcing the Spaniards into disorder, pushing them back toward the sea. Magellan was struck in the leg by a poisoned arrow as he tried to rally his wounded men and cover their retreat toward the boats. Slowed and off balance, he stumbled as Mactan warriors closed in with bamboo spears and overwhelmed his final defense, a fatal encounter that ended his expedition. The Spaniards retreat, and the battle ends in a decisive victory for the warriors of Mactan. But the expedition's troubles are far from over. Magellan is dead, and with him dies the one man holding the expedition together. Among those affected is Enrique, Magellan's interpreter, a man who had traveled thousands of miles with the expedition. According to Magellan's will, Enrique was supposed to be set free after his master's death. Instead, the new commanders order him to continue serving. Enrique refused, probably because Magellan had told him that he would be free after his death. Barbosa refused to honor this, threatened Enrique that he would remain a slave and upon return to Spain, be put into the service of Magellan's widow, his sister, Beatriz Barbosa. According to Pigafetta, Humabon and Enrique arranged a plot. Enrique informed Humabon that the expedition was leaving and advised that he should seize the ships and its merchandise. Just days later, Humabon invites the Spanish leaders to a feast in Cebu. It seems like an opportunity to repair relations. Instead, it becomes a massacre. Fighting erupts. Duarte Barbosa is killed. João Serão is captured. From their ships, the survivors watch helplessly as Serão begs them not to leave him behind. But they can't risk another attack, so they sail away, leaving him to his fate. In the span of just a few days, the expedition has lost Magellan, Duarte Barbosa, João Serra, and many of the men who could have replaced them. And now, they're facing another problem. There aren't enough sailors left to crew every ship. The expedition started with 5 ships. Now, only 3 remain, and even that is too many. The crew makes a painful decision. One of the ships, the Concepcion, has to be abandoned, not because it's damaged, not because it's sinking, because there aren't enough living men to sail it. So they strip it of supplies, then set it on fire, watching one of their own ships burn in the harbor. Eventually, the survivors reach the Spice Islands. The mission that started the entire expedition is finally complete, but getting there was only half the challenge. They still have to get home. The 2 remaining ships separate. The Trinidad attempts to cross the Pacific. It fails, damaged by storms and eventually captured by the Portuguese. That leaves only 1 ship, the Victoria. The Victoria sails west, across the Indian Ocean, around Africa. And once again, the crew faces starvation. Disease returns. Men continue to die. But somehow, the ship keeps moving. Then finally, September 1522, nearly 3 years after leaving Spain, the Victoria returns home, or what's left of it. Out of roughly 270 men who began the expedition, only 18 make it back. 5 ships left Spain. Only 1 returned. Ferdinand Magellan never saw the end of the voyage. But the survivors accomplished something no one had ever done before. They became the first people to sail around the world. And they paid for it with almost everything. Today, Magellan's expedition is remembered as one of the greatest voyages ever undertaken. And it absolutely was. But when we talk about it, we often focus on maps, routes, discoveries, the big historical milestones. What we forget is the human side. The sailors who crossed an ocean so vast they nearly starved to death. The men who ate worm-infested biscuits because there was nothing else left. The crew who boiled leather just to stay alive. The explorers who survived mutiny, disease, storms, and battle. The men who watched their captain die on a beach in Mactan and still found a way home. Because in the end, the most incredible part of Magellan's expedition isn't that they sailed around the world, it's that anyone survived it at all.